We have a massive power, and it's the power to say no.
2024 is the year when the pushback begins in earnest.
People ain't seen nothing yet. That's what I keep telling people.
It is a master-servant relationship where we, the governed, are the masters.
Doctors are gaslighting patients.
You press down enough on people for long enough, you leave them no choice but to rebel.
So, no, I don't want to forget about it, and I won't shut up about COVID.
The story of the unvaccinated is still yet to be told.
We are one people, one flag, one Australia.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the XCandidates. My name is Stephen Tripp, joined by Mr. Adam Zara. Big day, Adam. Moment of history in the world.
Yeah, mate. How you going anyway, quickly?
Yeah, as good as I can be, mate.
Oh, mate, you know what? I mean, woke up to it this morning and it was all over the news. I mean, everyone knows what we're talking about. But and we'll get into it with our guest as well, regarding, you know, the incident with the ex-president or the president. Oh, how do you pronounce it? The President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump.
You just that in America they keep that title, so it's just President Donald Trump. Yeah,
President Donald Trump. There you go. So but how iconic! I love that photo that you had at the start of the show, right, where he's got his arm up and he's just like, you know what? I'm solid. I'm good.
Yeah, it's just a complete show of defiance and the strength of the man. But I mean, you would think that being shot is a horrific moment for anyone, and for him to be able to stand up straight away and say to his Secret Service, "No, I want to show that we're going to keep fighting," and he kept saying, "Fight, fight, fight." I think that was a galvanizing moment in history.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people said it was the F word. Right, and when it was the other F word, I believe you. Like from when I watch those clips and stuff like that, I believe he was saying "fight" as well. So that's bloody awesome, mate. And I you know what? I give it to him. I really do. I think it's galvanized him towards me. I mean, I don't know the man, but so far, to be honest with you, I feel like he's saying everything right. He seems to be doing everything right, and I know that in the communities that we work with and we talk to, when they want to get rid of somebody, that's kind of like they're the one that you kind of want in. And I think that just galvanized that point.
Now, thank you for everyone who are watching live on Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube, and thank you to everyone that will watch this later. But if you are watching us live, you can contribute in the chat as always. Let us know what you think in the comments, and also at some point we'll give the link out if you want to call in and ask our special guest a question or make a comment and just have your say. It's like Talkback Radio. I call this Talkback Streaming. So it's your opportunity if you want to call in and make a comment. But let's kick things off quickly, just letting everyone know about Buy Me a Coffee. We'll let you know every week about how you can support us. If you choose to throw us a few dollars, it just helps to pay for the stream. We set up a new website, so it will help pay for that. And it also gives me and Adam a warm and fuzzy feeling inside every time we see that email that comes through to let us know that someone has donated. So thank you everyone that has donated, and if you choose to, you can find the link in the show notes for Buy Me a Coffee. You can also head to our t-shirt shop to get your own t-shirt if you wish. I had some people reach out saying that we should make a Donald Trump t-shirt. I just felt like that was politicizing it a little bit. We don't want to be seeing as though we would profit from a horrific incident like an attempted assassination. So I've decided not to do that. But if you want to get your own Ex-Candidates t-shirt, you can head there. And lastly, as well, the new website is up and running, commandingthenarrative.com. Very easy to remember. And if you want to keep up to date with everything that we're doing, all our podcasts, any articles that I might write, any news that we might have, events. Adam's running for council soon, so if he's got any events, I'm sure we would be able to promote it on here. A lot of people say that our stuff doesn't pop up on their social media. I suppose we're shadow banned, so best way to go around that is to head to commandingthenarrative.com. Up the top right hand corner there's a button that says sign up. You can sign up to the newsletter, get a weekly email just to update of you on all the podcasts and everything that we're doing. So good way of for people to be able to follow us in everything that we're doing. But tonight's episode will be a good one because we've got a returning guest. Now, we interviewed Dr. Peter Ridd back in August 2022 on episode 16, so it's been quite a while. I think now is a good time to speak with Dr. Ridd and get an update on everything that he's doing and all the research that he's been doing and all the work that he's been doing. So let's welcome him right now. Dr. Peter Ridd, welcome back to the X-Candidates.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, great to have you on board again. And we've bumped into each other. Well, all of us have bumped into each other at different events and NREN and all that kind of stuff. And we've seen you down in Canberra and a few other things. So even though it was a long time ago with you being on the podcast, we have seen each other a few times through the years, through the last couple of years. And it's, as I said, it's always a pleasure to speak to you and, just grab that little piece of your knowledge. So I do encourage everybody to ring in because it's not often that you get to speak to somebody of such caliber as Dr. Peter Ridd. So, get on the phone or however it works with the internet and the computer, just get it on and ask your question.
Yeah, I will put the link in the chat in a moment. But first, Dr. Ridd, I mean, today is a moment in history. We can't ignore it. We do need to discuss it because it is a significant event, the assassination attempt on President Donald Trump. What are your views of what's happened today?
My view is that the people on the side of politics who have demonized Trump to such an extent that they have basically made him the equal of Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, they've polarized things so much in a ridiculous way. They actually have to take some responsibility for this hatred, this complete unhinged hatred that has gone around about Donald Trump. Now, you may disagree with him. I think he's a slightly, difficult character to like in a lot of ways, but he's not Adolf Hitler and he's nothing like that. And that's what's happened in America. And they do it to other people. I think Nigel Farage, they have the same reaction to him and it's completely unhinged. And those people need to take just a little bit of responsibility for what's happened. And they need to throttle back on he's a threat to a democracy and, he's a complete disaster, to just get things a little bit more balanced.
Yes, definitely. Look, it wouldn't like an assassination attempt against your political opponent is horrific. Like if Joe Biden was shot or I mean, a Greens person here in Australia, you don't want to see that sort of violence. The disputes here, whether it be in America or Australia, are meant to be settled through debate and at the ballot box. And having open discussion is extremely important.
Yeah, but the thing is that I think you're right. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Joe Biden, but I don't hate him. I don't think he's like Adolf Hitler. I think he's incompetent and various other things. I don't dislike Albo at all. I think I don't agree with his politics. But people have got to this stage where they utterly hate Donald Trump or they hate Nigel Farage. And you see it again with, even people like Pauline Hanson, where people go completely crazy about Pauline Hanson. Now, you may disagree with her politics, but she's not an evil person the way they seem to think that Trump is an evil person. And this is the difference, I think, between a lot on the left wing and the rest of us who just will have a political disagreement. They won't like somebody, but they don't take it to this ridiculous extreme.
Yeah, that's right. I think we have to remember at the end of the day that they're all people who are trying to, in their belief, fix their country or put policies for the betterment of their people. Now, you might not necessarily agree with that, but that's not warrant. Just because you don't agree with it, it doesn't warrant hatred, and it doesn't warrant physical violence either. Like, I mean, Stephen and I have ran, in different campaigns, and we've probably said things that people disagree with, and I really wouldn't expect to be, shot at or physically, hurt or assaulted, right? Just because I say, I want to limit migration, not because I care about their race, but because I don't think Australia's infrastructure or economy can handle such an influx of people so quickly. And I think we could liken it to, and you might agree with this too, Dr. Peter Ridd, is that, when we see the temperature on weather maps now on the news, 33 degrees, in 2017, it was still, the landscape was green and it was at 33 degrees. Oh, it's going to be a balmy day today. And now, right, it could be 27 degrees and the map is bright red saying, oh my God, a heat bomb's going to come down from the equator, and we're going to have sweltering days. And it's like literally 5 degrees cooler than it was 5 years ago.
Yes, I mean, what you're saying there is that is this an extremism mostly on the other side? I mean, I think that, on the right and centre right, there are elements of that on our side too. So we must be mindful of that. But I think on the other side, it's overwhelming that, as you say, a hot day becomes, well, it's climate change and it's all our fault because somehow we're burning coal. I mean, it's just gone completely ridiculous. You can be I have no problem with people being worried about climate change, being, very, very worried about climate change. But this complete extremism where everything is caused by it, and that, this is just ridiculous, the stage that we've got to. And I think that, in a sense, this whole Trump thing is just a part of that somebody that they disagree with, they then just say that they're evil people. Whereas we will say, well, we just disagree with you, where they will think that we're actually evil. That's a problem.
Yeah, it's a big problem. Now, look, I mean, the podcast that Adam and I do, whether it be the ex-candidates or Commanding the Narrative, it is a political podcast. So we will speak about this event in the future. And for this moment in time, we had Dr. Ridd on to speak about a whole bunch of other issues. So we might move on to that. Let's let the dust settle. Over the next week or so, there'll be a lot of information to come out, a lot of reaction. We'll be able to absorb this a little bit more, and then I'm sure Adam and I will tackle this next week. But for you, Dr. Ridd, last time that we had you on, it was a much happier moment because you were celebrating record high coral cover. We talked about at the time that once you reach a high, it's likely to drop down and go backwards, and then the lefties would jump on that and say, "Look at the reef is dying," blah blah blah. But you've sent through another graph. I'll put it up on the screen right now. Since we've spoken, it's actually increased again. So what you can see there is we have a new record high coral in 2024.
Well, actually, strictly we don't. But I'll come to that in a second. But you're right. In 2022, in August, we just hit this record high. And so we had more coral than at any time in the previous 35 years or so. Now, these are data from the Australian Institute of Marine Science. They look at the coral on the perimeter of about 100 reefs, and they've been doing this for a very long time. And in my view, it's a remarkable record. There are certain problems with it, but it's still a very solid record. And we hit a world, record amounts of coral. Now, I was worried. I think, well, when you hit a record, you're going to go down. But then last year, we were essentially at almost the same level. And this year, actually, because there's an uncertainty margin of a few percent there, you can't actually say for sure that we're higher. The number is a little bit higher for sure, but what you can say for sure is the last 3 years have all been higher than at any of the years in the previous 35 or 36 years. So that says the Great Barrier Reef is doing really well in terms of the amount of coral. But, even if you go back to 2010-11, where if you look at that graph, you can see that there's about half as much coral then as there is now. The reef wasn't in a bad state. It was just in a different part of a cycle, because you see what happens is the reef has a big cyclone. So that dip in 2012 was really a couple of really big cyclones and crown-of-thorns starfish plagues had gone through. And by coincidence, we had really not much coral on the reef. The reef wasn't in poor health. It was just in a phase like a bushfire going through a forest. It looks bad. You haven't got many trees. We didn't have much coral. But then it recovers, and we've just had a few years where the starfish plagues which are completely natural, by the way, haven't killed much coral, and we haven't had. Well, we had one decent-sized cyclone in 2016 or 17, but it really didn't kill that much. All these big bleaching events that they've been telling you about in 2016, 2017, 2020, and 2022, and the one this year, they've done nothing in terms of coral loss, right? The coral has just gone from strength to strength. And so what this really says is the Great Barrier Reef is doing really well. It's always been doing really well. And those bleaching events that the science institutions have been telling us have been utterly devastating, have killed very little coral, especially relative to the regenerative capacity. Now, one of the things I'm saying is that, you don't get record high coral every year, and you don't get it 3 years in a row very often. And the industries that are suffering because of the, government regulations, bad reputation of the reef, like the tourist industry, they should be spreading this news far and wide so everybody knows about it. But actually, nobody knows about this. We did a survey. I'm the chairman of the Australian Environment Foundation, and we did a survey last year, and only 3% of the population knew last year that we'd got record amounts of coral. Now, why doesn't this news get out?
Yeah, that's crazy, because you'd think you would be like marketing it as a way of saying, hey, if you want to see the reef in its glory, now's the time to spend the money to come out. If from all over the world, come out now and check it out, because it can't stay like this forever. As you're saying, there's when you're at the very top, there's only one way really to go, and that is backwards. So all the advertising, or the Australian advertising industry should be really marketing to get people out here and boost the economy for northern Queensland.
Precisely. I mean, I've estimated that we spend somewhere between, roughly $300 million every year on saving the Great Barrier Reef, to all the institutions, the grants going out to various bodies to save the reef, right? If we just spent 5 million of those telling the Americans and the British and the Japanese and everybody, the reef's actually doing really well, guys, come and visit it. This would be a sensible way to spend the money. And by the way, all this money we're spending is completely wasted. I mean, there's no way that bounce back is because we spent all this money. It's, it's just a complete coincidence. We didn't have any huge cyclones. So we seem to spend all this money to tell the world that the reef is doing really badly, because every time Qantas, or Coles have got these campaigns to, buy our stuff and we'll chuck in $10 to save the reef, what they're actually saying is, the reef needs saving. The reef is bad. Don't go to visit it. And one of the things I'm doing at the moment with the Institute of Public Affairs actually is looking to see just how much the tourist industry has been affected by this terrible publicity, which just goes out. I mean, literally every couple of months, there's more bad news about the reef. That's, if you said, you guys are from Sydney, if you told the whole world that Sydney Harbour was a polluted mess, that the harbour bridge was rusting and falling apart, and that the Opera House was just like a public toilet, it was so dirty, do you reckon people would go to see Sydney in the numbers that they do now? No, they wouldn't. Well, that's what we do to the Great Barrier Reef. That's what Qantas does to the Great Barrier Reef. That's what the federal government and the Queensland government say about the Great Barrier Reef. And when we get record high coral, they're strangely muted about this.
It's because we know it doesn't fit their narrative. So, you have to, you can't tax the farmers for destroying the barrier reef if the barrier reef is healthy and in good condition. But it seems like a mental kind of like asylum, because the revenue generated from tourism, is a massive driver for those kind of regions, especially the small businesses and stuff like that. Just quickly, because I know Stephen's got a question, how much damage does a couple of, let's say, like 5 tour boats or 10 tour boats a day going through the Great Barrier Reef, maybe to different sections of the reef, how much damage would something like that cause?
None, right? Well, as near as none as makes no difference. Firstly, they're very careful about the little patches of coral. One of the things they do is they tell the tourists, please don't touch the coral with your fins, right? Because you can damage it, all right? And it's true that they do get little, nicks on them and the rest of it. But if you look about it, the Great Barrier Reef is as big as Victoria, right? It's huge. I did an estimate just the other day that the actual area of the whole national park that the tourist goes to is 0.0000 enough, how many O's? 1% of the of the Great Barrier Reef. So even if they obliterated the tourists, those little patches that they go to see, one little corner of one reef, and there's 3,000 reefs, even if they obliterated them, it doesn't add up to a hill of beans. But actually, they're really careful, and the tourists are very good. I mean, I've been out on these things, and people do their best not to touch the coral.
Yeah. Now the link is in the chat if anyone wants to call in and ask a question. But you were speaking about the media and how they report on it. This is an article from the Guardian, and it says most of it was dead in regards to the Great Barrier Reef. So this is exactly what you're talking about in terms of how the media is representing the state of the reef, and why would you go to visit the reef if it's dead? But they've got this here, and they've got all this diagram in March, and the reef looks like that. But then they've got in June, it's all bleached and trying to make out that it's dead. How do you react to seeing something like this in the media?
When you look at that in detail, it's one little corner of one little reef on the whole Great Barrier Reef. And I don't doubt that in that particular case, there was loss of coral. I don't doubt that. I mean, you've got a thing that's as big as Victoria. If I go to all those forests in Victoria and New South Wales, do you reckon I can't find a couple of dead trees? Because that's what we're talking here. Some little corner of a forest that they've gone to, that these scientists who are actually not working as scientists, they're acting as ideological, sort of political stooges, basically, to run a narrative, essentially. You're going to be able to find these areas. And unfortunately, we're seeing there that the scientific institutions are pushing a story which is not based on science. And then the media not asking the hard questions. I mean, it's not hard to ask the question, all right, that little corner of the reef near Magnetic Island of Lizard Island is in poor shape. But what about these statistics that came out last year and then just now showing we've got record amounts of coral? How does that fit in with this? Those questions are never asked of these so-called scientists.
Dr. Peter Reid, I'm so glad that you actually pointed out the size of the Great Barrier Reef. Now, I myself have also been to the Great Barrier Reef because, funnily enough, that's one of the things in my life I've really wanted to see. And I went on a honeymoon, and I actually went, and I think I would have been, probably in one of the record low times in history, to be honest with you, and it was still bloody magnificent. I can tell you that. So I do know that you have to be very careful. It's about, I think it's almost an hour out in the boat from mainland. It takes almost an hour, and they put you through a training session and they say, this is how your safety gear, watch it, if you see sharks and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. And which I did, which scared the hell out of me. And I'll never forget that. And we looked each other in the eye, me and that Mr. Pointy, I tell you. But I can tell you that, people who want to spend all that money and go to the Great Barrier Reef, they don't want to destroy it. They want to observe it. They want to see it with their eyes, because it is a bloody beautiful place. And just with that point of that part of Lizard Island where the reef was a little bit dead, what kind of bounce back do you expect from an area that has suffered that bit of like say bleaching or where it's come off from premium quality? Like, how long would something like that expected to take to rejuvenate?
You can see it in that graph. It's 5 to 10 years, and you can see it over the whole Great Barrier Reef, where large scale destruction, or say 1/10 of the reef in the various sectors that they have. You can sometimes see it crash. If you get a really big cyclone going through, you can lose huge amounts of coral on a third of the reef. It'll be back within 5 to 10 years. Or even at the reef scale, you can see where the Australian Institute of Marine Science have kept on doing one particular reef for many years. You see it go high and then crash, and then high and crash. And essentially the crash is, overnight with a cyclone, and 5 to 10 years it's back. And there's actually good reason to expect that actually our Great Barrier Reef needs these resetting of the seabed, essentially, in the same way as our forests do, because this is what's always happened. Now, excuse me, I just dropped my ear. If you go to some of the reefs up near the equator where there aren't cyclones, they're very different, because they don't necessarily go through these huge cyclones. But our reefs do that. And, you actually want them to do that periodically, even though sometimes it looks terrible. I mean, when a cyclone goes through, by the way, it's wipeout, right? All the Platon staghorn coral, it's not just broken, it's gone. It's been, the waves from the cyclone utterly obliterated. And it's very, very upsetting to see that. And you often see a lot of scientists get quite emotional about that, or when they see coral bleaching. But it's just part of the way the Great Barrier Reef works. And you shouldn't say it's bad. It's not good. It's just the way it is.
Circle of life.
Yeah, I've got another article that I want to bring up. This is on Yahoo News, and it says new drone imagery reveals 97% of coral dead at Lizard Island. I don't know how you can determine whether a coral is dead from a drone up in the sky, but it's written by three people: Jane Williamson from Macquarie University, Karen Joyce from James Cook University, and Vincent, I can't pronounce that last name, Raoult from Griffith University. Now, when I scroll down through the article, you read it all, blah, 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 and you get to the end here, and it talks about each one of them, every single one of them are receiving funding from the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. Now, this is probably more of a question about our institutions. Is it a good idea for these people to be funded by a group like the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, which I've had a look. It's being funded by a lot of big business, BHP or Coles and even McLaren and companies like that, which I don't know what McLaren's got to do with the Great Barrier Reef, but what would you have to say about that question?
It doesn't make any difference, because whether they get money from there or they get the money from the government to save the reef or the Australian Research Council, all these organisations are fully signed up to the idea that the reef is completely devastated and it's all from climate change and the damage done by farmers, and that we've got to do all these things. So it actually doesn't matter. Our fundamental problem in the science is that we don't have what I call red teams, where we've got this system of peer review where for me to get my work published, saying, for example, as I used to, that there is no problem with the Great Barrier Reef, I've got to get all my peer scientists to agree with that in order for me to get that published. And in order to get more funding, it also goes out for peer review. So they have to agree with what I'm trying to do, even to get funding. Now, that's government funding and not necessarily this private funding. So it doesn't matter what you do, because of this system of peer review, where we're not actually trying to engender a debate, which is really what you have to have in science. You only get good science when you've got scientists who are actually arguing about what is right and what is wrong. That is always a good thing to happen. But we actually never fund that in science. We actually do the opposite. We have peer review, which forms groupthink, and they're all cut from the same pod. So, what happened to me being fired from the university was because I stepped outside that. They could not accept that. You have a groupthink. It works similar to the way the mafia works. You step outside the group, you get your kneecaps kicked in. That's the way the system works.
Dr. Reid, should we have like some sort of independent, maybe publicly funded body of scientists that actually like it, so they're not worrying about money from like big business, like big pharma, big climate, whatever it is. They're not worried about that. So basically, that's taxpayer money for the sole purpose of independent peer review to replicate experiments, go through papers. So they're paid to sit there day in, day out, read papers, replicate experiments, and actually properly peer review articles that have been written.
Yeah, what we need is a group, and how you fund them, that's tricky, but we need a group of scientists whose sole job is to make bastards of themselves, like an auditor. Auditors do that in accounting. Accountants don't like auditors because auditors are there to find mistakes and find corruption, right? So accountants don't like them, but everybody knows, all the accountants know, you've got to have auditors, because if you don't have auditors, the books will be fudged because you won't get caught. So we need scientific auditors whose job is there not to find out whether something's right, but to try to find out if something is wrong. And hopefully, in most cases, they'll find nothing wrong. Auditors usually find almost nothing wrong because the accountants they're auditing know, well, I'm going to be audited. It's just not worth, the trouble fiddling the books. I may as well get it right. Now, this auditing in science does not happen. So, for example, these red teams, which is essentially the audit, I actually tried with the Australian Research Council. I used to get a lot of money from the Australian Research Council. I asked if we could get some money to do some checks on some other Great Barrier Reef research, which I thought was prima facie there was doubt about it, and that we would redo the experiments and see whether it was right. I was told by the Australian Research Council that it was against the funding rules to do those replication experiments, that even if they'd wanted to, which by the way they didn't, they couldn't have done anyway. And I got to admit, they were right. You go to the funding rules and you're not allowed to do that. Now, this happens all over science, by the way. So, for example, there's a very famous, it's now infamous, bit of research on Alzheimer's disease, which was done, I think, in 2005. And, a whole lot of scientists have spent literally billions of dollars following that Alzheimer's research. And they now finally realize that the original research was fraudulent. It wasn't just wrong, like a lot of the stuff we're talking about. It was actually fraudulent. And it took them 15 years to work out that they'd gone down a rat hole, basically. And why is that? Well, the reason is that nobody bothered right at the beginning in 2005 to say, well, this is very interesting. Let's replicate it and see if we can do it. And if they'd done that, they would have found, actually, this is a complete load of twaddle. But what happens because of peer review is that, well, this bit of research gets up, everybody starts to believe it. The scientists would have been realizing this isn't working very well, but they weren't prepared to, put the flag up the pole and say this is wrong, because if they did that, then because of peer review, they would have maybe lost funding. So it then took 15 years for them to find out this was all wrong. And this is happening not just in climate, not just in Alzheimer's, not just in Great Barrier Reef. This is right throughout the scientific system. So we have a seriously broken scientific system.
You were down in Sydney last month at the Environment and Energy Forum. I'm going to bring up a clip of you speaking at that forum about this issue.
A little bit about the science, because one of the problems which we have right at the bottom of a lot of these problems is, are our scientific institutions as reliable and trustworthy as we'd like them to be? Do people really believe a CSIRO report that comes out nowadays? Now, if you'd asked me 25 years ago, would I believe a CSIRO report? I would say I'd believe it like I would the King James Bible. It would be that solid. But unfortunately, times have changed.
Now, you've made that point about it being as trustworthy as the Bible. Is that a process of you waking up over time, or is that a process that our institutions have been unraveling and are not up to the standard that they used to be?
It's the latter, that the CSIRO was a phenomenal institution, and there are still parts of it which are. The industrial side of it, where, if the thing doesn't actually work, you can see it really quickly. But the climate side of it, where we won't know whether they're right or wrong, or probably wrong, actually, for another 50 years, they can be extremely unreliable. Yes, it has taken me longer than it should have done to realize that our whole system has been broken for many decades, in fact. It really took until 2013 when I realized that, that there was a problem. Because when I was working on the Great Barrier Reef, I could see in my little area, it was gone crazy that they were ignoring a whole lot of facts. But I thought the rest of the Great Barrier Reef, that yes, it must be damaged, because all my fellow scientists and the marine biologists, they seem to say that. It wasn't until I started looking at that, I realized, no, actually the whole Great Barrier Reef is fine. And then there's this thing called the replication crisis, which is well known throughout the whole scientific fraternity, where about half of the peer-reviewed literature is now accepted to be probably flawed, right? This is now well known by all the major, governing science bodies like the Australian Academy of Science, the United States Academies of Science. Everybody knows this, right? But we're not doing anything about it. So it took me until 2013 to realize that the whole system is broken. And that's at that stage I decided, okay, my career as a reef scientist doing new research more or less is over, because what I have to do now is work on the quality assurance systems to make science more reliable. Now, I'm only working on reef science and climate science, but actually It's trying to solve a much bigger, wider problem.
With the peer review process, I would imagine it would be very expensive, obviously, to run the initial experiment. So obviously, you have your thought tank and your thought process, and then you have to do your investigations, design the experiments for the initial stage. So the person who comes up with it, like, I'm probably wrong, but like EMC equals MC squared, right? Okay, so to come up with all that kind of stuff and figure it all out, but then to replicate and test it, because it's all because the science and the format and the experiment's already there, you're not really thinking about how to make it happen. You're just trying to use their process to replicate it. Would it be a lot cheaper to peer review properly?
Yeah, it's very cheap. When you started there, I thought you were going to say this whole system of proper peer review, red teams, would be expensive, which is what, when I've brought this up with the chief scientist, with various other people, they've said, oh, we can't do that. We don't have enough money for it. And I'm thinking, well, hang on, this is basic quality assurance. Somebody did the experiment on Alzheimer's research. Wouldn't the first thing you do be to see if it's right before you spend, just Toyota decide, oh, we can't afford to do any quality assurance on our cars because it's awfully expensive, to do that sort of thing. It's just crazy. You said E equals MC squared, Albert Einstein, right? He said E equals MC squared and that light would be bent by the gravitational field of the sun. What did we do? There was a couple of eclipses. We sent people out to see, did that star actually move just a little bit when the solar eclipse? And yes, it did. The light beam got bent. Albert Einstein seems to be right. And we have still not, in physics, stopped testing that relativistic theory of relativity to more and more decimal places of accuracy, because physicists want to see if it breaks down, because it breaks down. That's really, really interesting stuff. So that's science being done properly. We're actually trying to break it, right? The job of the scientist is to see if you can make it wrong. Because if you can't make it wrong, then you can say, well, I think I can rely on it, right? And that's what we've done with Newton's laws of motion. They are not just Newton's laws of motion, Newton's laws of force and all the rest of it. They are so solid, we can build a bridge and we can rely on it. We can build an airplane and we can rely on it. But it's only become like that because we've had a whole lot of people trying to break that science, and they've failed and failed and failed. We need to do that with all sorts of science.
How do you feel when people say the science is settled on a particular issue?
Look, when it comes to Newton's laws of motion or Newton's laws of gravitation, right? Is that science settled? Well, it is settled to 8 significant figures, right? 8 decimal places. But it's not settled at the 9th and 10th, right? That somebody might come along and, well, actually, we know that because that's where where Einstein's theories actually get it right at the 9th and 10th and 11th decimal place, right? So no, it's never settled, right? No science, but some of this science is not just not settled, it's not even close to being settled. I mean, with climate, for instance, we don't understand. My wife's just looking at some stuff where we crossed the Sahara Desert in 1989, all right? And the interesting thing about a lot of the Sahara Desert is you go back just a few thousand years, and rather than being sand dunes, it was savanna grassland and giraffes and all sorts of things. That Lake Chad was 10 or 50 times bigger than it is now. We don't understand why the Sahara Desert, the climate has utterly changed in just a few thousand years. If we don't understand fundamental things like that, how on earth can you say that the climate science is settled? We're not even within a bull's roar in that case. Now, with Newton's laws of motion, we are pretty settled up to a certain number of significant figures, but then we're not settled anymore.
I've got another couple of quotes from the energy, environment and energy forum that you spoke at. The first one, and you said, was the science has been wrong for 50 years on nuclear. And then you went on to say that there are 1 to 2 kilograms of uranium in everyone's backyard. Yeah. Now, with Peter Dutton coming out with the coalition's nuclear policy, this is the big debate at the moment. And the battle lines have been drawn, and each side is presenting different information. When you say that the science has been wrong for the last 50 years on nuclear, what do you mean by that?
The safety levels that we set on nuclear radiation doses are set using this thing called the linear no threshold hypothesis. For example, we know that if you get a certain dose of radiation from, you know, the Hiroshima bomb or whatever, you've got a 50% chance of dying from it. But if you get a really, really low dose, does the actual death rate go down proportionally with the dose? And the answer is no. So, for example, if you use the same system we use for the nuclear safety, we know if you take a Panadol headache tablet, if you take about 30 Panadol tablets, it can kill you, right? That's an overdose which will actually kill you. That would mean if you use the same system they use in radiation, if you took 2 tablets for your headache, there's a 2/30ths, which is what, about a 5% chance that 2 Panadols kills you, right? So if you then say, well, there's 25 million people in Australia and they ought to have taken 2 Panadols, you multiply 5% by 25 million in you. I'm doing the numbers too quickly in my head. I don't know. There's over 1 million people have been killed by Panadol last year, right? That's what we do with nuclear radiation safety. And it's complete rubbish because we know that taking a small dose is essentially risk-free. But if you take a big dose, it's definitely not risk-free. You'd have a big dose of radiation, it will kill you for sure, but little doses won't. And of course they don't, because as I said, we've got a huge amount of radiation. We're irradiated all the time. It's coming up from the ground, from all that uranium and other radioactive material that's in the ground. I wrote an article in the Australian saying that, you know, my backyard's got 2 kilograms of uranium, and a lot of comments said, oh, he must have that right. He must mean micrograms. No, it's kilograms, right? There's kilograms of uranium. It's a very, very common. I had a PhD student who used to actually use radionuclides as a tracer for all sorts of things. And he'd actually use the bore in our backyard in Mundingburra in Townsville, soak the water out. It's absolutely full of radon and radium, the water that comes out in a bore, right? So we're receiving this all the time. We're receiving radiation from outer space all the time. Airline pilots get a whole lot more because they don't have as much atmosphere to protect them. Astronauts get a massive dose of cosmic rays coming down to them all the time. So we live in this radiation environment. The so-called science of the radiation safety is utter rubbish. It's set probably by a factor of 100 too conservatively. And by the way, that has killed literally thousands of people, right? In 2 ways. In the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, and that was a disaster, there was a whole lot of people in Eastern Europe, women who decided to abort their pregnancy. Right? And they decided to do that because they were worried about these pathetically low doses of radiation. And when they use this linear no threshold hypothesis, they're saying that all these people are going to die, and the children are going to be malformed, and these people, and you can understand why they did it, they had an abortion. And we're talking thousands, maybe 10,000 unnecessary abortions, right? Or you go for Fukushima, right? Only nobody died there, but they evacuated this whole area. They shouldn't have evacuated most of the area, right? They took people, old people who were living, you know, their last few years around the Fukushima area, and they shipped them off somewhere else to slowly die outside their home. And it was completely unnecessary because of those low doses, even though they were a little bit higher than they would have been due to the nuclear accident, they were still well in the safety zone, and those people shouldn't have been moved away from their home, moved away from their loved ones and all the rest of it, and ultimately increase their life or reduce their life expectancy due to alcoholism, loneliness, suicide, and all the other things that happen when you dislocate people. So you can be too safe, right? You can be so safe that you start killing people. And that's what we've actually done with nuclear radiation. The people who in hospitals who use nuclear radiation to kill cancer, we used to train these people because I'm a physicist, you know, at the university. And they'd often come to me and say, you know, we have to have 2 parts of our brain. One is the nuclear safety that we use for ourselves with a little patch they have on to measure them. And we know this is complete rubbish because when we kill the cancer in the body, we actually have to use the real numbers for what actually is a lethal dose. And this is well known, right? Everybody knows in this nuclear physics that these safety levels are set ridiculously conservative.
Yeah. Because that's right. Because what happens when you're getting like your teeth, your mouth x-rayed, you broke a tooth or you got a cavity or something like that, right? They x-ray your mouth. I mean, they're bombarding you with radiation to x-ray your face. And then, and they're worried, they're all wearing lead suits and all that kind of stuff. And here you are just getting it shot straight into your eyeballs, Like, it doesn't make sense.
We know that it has very little effect, right? So it has almost no effect. You're getting more radiation, maybe not every day, but certainly over longer periods, directly from all the other sources that are around us. And these people who, the radiation oncologists and all these sorts of people, they are fully aware of this, but there are these restrictions and they have to do this. But you see, this bad science has gone on for these safety regulations. They had a good reason to do it at the beginning. They thought, well, you can't be too safe, but actually you can. So that's why they did it. But the crime is that they've never actually updated them over the years. And the crime is that people haven't been educated to know that you are living in an environment where you've got huge amounts of radiation all the time. Don't worry about a 3 Mile Island nuclear disaster. Don't worry about Fukushima. It's nothing. Yeah, Chernobyl was a disaster. There was no ifs, no buts about that. If you want to build a terrible Soviet-era 1950s nuclear reactor around Sydney, well, you'd be stupid. But if you build a 2020s modern nuclear reactor, essentially, you've got far bigger things to worry about than something coming out of a nuclear reactor. You're going to be run over by a bus 1 million times first.
You're
sorry,
you're saying a lot of things that are contrary to the narrative that is out there, which you seem to take a lot of pride in doing that, and I think rightfully so. This is Anthony Albanese speaking today, and obviously he was speaking in relation to what happened to President Trump. But I want to play this clip and then ask you a question based on what Prime Minister Albanese had to say.
There's still much that we don't know about the incident. Can I say this? And there's nothing to be gained from speculating. We don't know motives, all of these issues. So I do urge, one of the things I urge everyone to do is to exercise caution when reading unverified reports of the events and to seek out credible news sources. We all need to be on guard against those seeking to use misinformation to create division.
So he said the magic M word, misinformation, and we're staring down the barrel of misinformation, disinformation laws. And look, there's a saying in politics, never let a good crisis go to waste. And they brought up this misinformation, disinformation thing when they lost the Voice referendum as well. It seems that we're heading in that direction, and then we may have to confront this at some point. Are you concerned that your information might be censored if it's not being censored already? I'm sure you already are being censored in some ways. Are you concerned that you could be silenced?
Yes, I am, and I am being. I've been fact checked, I don't know, at least half a dozen times, at least. And you'll be surprised to know that I haven't got it right any time. I've been wrong every single time. So yeah, I would be closed down. I'll be closed down because Facebook or YouTube would not be able to take the risk of running my stuff, given that I will be fact-checked and found to be spreading misinformation, and then they have to pay 2% of their, worldwide revenue. So they're just going to close me down, right? So that's what's going to happen to me. But actually, I think bring it on, Albo, bring it on. Because what you're actually, and I don't think they're going to do that. I think they've already backed out of this because they realize what will happen. What will happen in addition to this is that there'll be a whole lot of 17-year-old teenage girls that will have their TikTok cancelled as well, because this will have to be done by an algorithm. Everything will have to go through an algorithm to check if it's misinformation, because because the Facebook and the rest of it and TikTok are going to be the gatekeepers for what, and if they get it wrong, they're the ones who pay, right? The government doesn't decide what's wrong and then they tell TikTok to take it down. TikTok has got to do it beforehand. So TikTok and the rest of them will now have to be unbelievably cautious about what they allow to go through. And they will inevitably start censoring people putting up a picture of their cat but using the wrong word, and all of a sudden this is misinformation. And suddenly you're, rather than taking down Peter Ridd occasionally or Stephen Tripp and Adam Zara, you're taking down all these little teenage girls, and everybody is going to see, you can't do this, can you? This just doesn't work. That if my stuff got cancelled, like teenage girls stuff got cancelled, can you imagine all the other stuff that I'm not allowed to see because the government has done this? So I think it might be one of these things. It's not until the heavy-handed approach gets so ridiculous that you'll actually be able to step back from that. But as I said, I suspect that Albo has realised that. They've actually withdrawn that legislation. They're saying they're going to bring it back. But I think they can see this is an actual poison chalice from they could really suffer if they do that wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it wouldn't be popular. I can imagine. I know when I take the phones and devices off the girls, my girls, there's nothing but backlash. So imagine if you did it to the Australian population of the young 16 to 17-year-old girls, and even these days the guys as well. I mean, everyone's on it. Everyone's snapping their food, and hey, because I tell you what happens if something simple like this, you take a photo of a nice hunk of steak that you've cooked on the barbie, and everyone has to eat the bugs. Like that's against the narrative too. That would get taken off.
It could do. Facebook's going to have to look at that, or TikTok is going to have to look at that and say, do I want to take the risk that will go through an RMIT fact check or ABC fact check, be found to be wrong, and now we're up for a lot of money? They're going to say no, right? So they are going to have to set the bar so ridiculously low that it's inevitable that just about everybody will either be censored or know somebody will be censored, and it will just become a running joke and it will fall in a heap, right? If you're going to do this, you're going to have to do this the way the Chinese have done it, right? Where they have literally armies of people sorting through stuff. Yeah, they use an algorithm as well, but then they have armies of people going through this. And I don't think that, even Albo would want to see that sort of thing happen. So I do worry about it, but I also think that I think it will be a disaster for the government if they try to bring that in.
Well, it's the Streisand effect. If you try and censor some information, then people will become more hungry for that information. Obviously you've been people have tried to censor you and suppress you and ridicule you. Have you found that has only enhanced your reputation or enhanced the thirst for people to get your information?
I'm sure that's right. I mean, the only reason that people know about me is I got fired. So that's the way it is. And I think especially the boys are seeking that stuff out. There's been a remarkable divergence between the boys and the girls in the young, in the 16, 17, 18-year-old cohort. I don't know whether you saw, there's a remarkable opinion poll from England looking at 17 and 16-year-old boys, and a third of boys would vote for reform, and another 20% would have the Reform Party in the UK, the breakaway one. Yeah. Whereas with the girls, almost none of them would. So I think the boys who are being, told that they're, toxically masculine. If they're white, they're white and toxic masculine. If they're straight, they're even worse. They're starting to rebel already. They're breaking away from the girls who are having quite a good time because they've been told that they're being victimized all the time. So this is the sort of thing going on. Yeah. And I think that if Albo comes along and effectively starts censoring this, what's going to happen is that they will find all sorts of ways using VPNs and the rest of it to bypass, and they'll get their information and they'll become real conspiracy theorists at that stage, which will not be a good thing. Actually, they could take that too far. But believe me, the young boys are turning, and they're turning to us, and the extreme left is actually getting pretty worried about it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great news, actually. I'm glad to hear that. And because, you know, because they start seeking out people like the Andrew Tates, where if you love him or hate him, right? But, you know, he has a pretty solid message. And from what I can see of him, he promotes, you know, men taking care of their families, getting jobs, becoming as successful as you can, so that you don't have to adhere to all the little rules and all the little implications of that. So, and then what happens is it's inspiring, you know, the young boys, the young men coming up, right, to go, well, wait a minute, that actually really, really resonates with me. Okay, you know, and that's how I want to be. So then they start seeking, like you said, more of it out. As a matter of fact, I think if they did bring the misinformation, disinformation laws in, it would be the end of social media, period. I think everyone would just turn it off because it would be junk. Like, you know, all right, as fun as it was, you know, all you're going to be seeing is Hawk Tour Girl and all those other stupid things that are happening at the moment. Okay, right? Which is, you know, fair enough. It's fun and entertaining or whatever, or, you know, but people still want serious content. Still, people are still watching news. People still want opinions. People are still seeking different sources of information, and that will be gone. So it will be useless.
That's right. So that's what I say. You know, bring it on, Albo. Do it. Yeah. By the way, there's another one where I think I want them to bring it on, and that is, I know we're going a little bit back to where we came from on the Great Barrier Reef. So you've heard about the UNESCO listing of the Great Barrier Reef, and that we've managed to delay it for another few years. We're actually being blackmailed. So every time UNESCO say, oh, we're reviewing it, then we have to give something to stop it being declared endangered. So the last thing we did was we gave away all the gillnet fishing down the Great Barrier Reef Queensland coast. We're even restricting fisheries in the Gulf of Carpentaria, right? On the wrong side of the Cape York Peninsula, to protect the Great Barrier Reef, because that's what UNESCO said they want. Actually, the Queensland government wanted it anyway, and they more or less said to UNESCO, why don't you demand this and we'll accede to that blackmail. So to me, I'd say no, bring on the endangered listing. Yeah, let's say it's endangered. We know that it's a load of rubbish. We don't care about UNESCO. We know that our reef is well protected. You can say what you like about it. And now you can't blackmail us anymore because it's already endangered. So bad, so sad, right? We know it's okay. So sometimes let it happen. There are very few consequences to that listing. There are huge consequences to the misinformation laws, but I think it will fall in a heap. And we better off having that. Then we've gone full circle. We've had the proper debate about where we set the line, about where the free speech ends and where it becomes, you know, you can't shout fire in a theatre and all those, or where it's genuine incitement to violence, which is the line for me. You incite violence, you're on the wrong side of the line. More or less anything on this side of the line is okay. So I think we're having that debate, and we probably need Albo to do it, and then we'll throttle back from that.
Wow. Dr. Reid, you're always amazing, and you're always a wealth of knowledge. We really appreciate you coming on tonight and joining us again in quite a day in history. Now, I think actually we'll just have a look. I think we've got a caller that's just quickly called in. I'll try and bring him on. Richard Storch. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
You'd like to ask a question?
Yeah, Peter, I saw you before you got fired. No, I'd like to say to Peter, I saw you before you were fired. I knew who you were.
Right. Okay.
You're the one.
A lot of good.
Have you got a question, Richard?
Yeah, I'd like to know where the money's coming and going. Yeah.
Where the money comes from or where it goes to?
Both.
Well, most of the money overwhelmingly comes from the government. As I said, there's about, very rough figures, 300 million a year. But then, the Qantases and the McLarens, apparently, they chuck in, I don't know how much more, but you're probably talking a few tens of millions. Where does it go? Well, we've got a campaign where we kill crown of thorn starfish out on the reef. Completely pointless, right? The number they kill is just a drop in the bucket compared with what's out there naturally. But It keeps a whole lot of people employed, having a great time swimming around and injecting crown of thorns starfish with some sort of poison. We spend a whole lot of money on indigenous stuff, which, mostly make work type stuff. There's money that some of it is actually useful repairing waterways, creek banks, and the rest of it. I estimate maybe 10% of that money is probably actually well worthwhile doing it. The other 90% is probably a waste. You'd be talking many tens of millions of dollars a year. You're talking, the scientific institutions would be burning up $150 million a year. Now, when I was at the Australian Institute of Marine Science as a scientist there, we actually were doing sort of blue sky research, trying to work out how the Great Barrier Reef worked. It was good, solid science. Now, all the science that's done in these is predicated on we've got to save the reef. So they're literally breeding what they call Frankenstein corals that supposedly will be able to get through climate change. I mean, it's complete rubbish. And if they are successful, it could be a total disaster. They're genetically engineering corals. You really want to do this? Or they're experimenting with making clouds, right? They're making clouds to reflect the light so the water doesn't get so hot. It's just pathetic, actually, how hopeless some of this stuff is. It's a waste of money, most of it. The genetic stuff might be worse than a waste of money because they might actually be successful and God knows what they'll produce. But, it's essentially make work for scientists, managers, do-gooders. That's where it goes.
Well, thank you, Richard. Thanks for calling in, mate.
A lot of money for not much result.
Zero.
All right, Richard. We thanks for that. We'll let you go now, but thank you for calling in and contributing, mate.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, mate. Dr. Reid, I've got one quick question. I don't know. Have you got a few more minutes left? Are you okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. All right. So, let's bring it. I'm just gonna, because you said you spent so many years in marine science. Okay.
Yep.
Now let's bring it back now. Okay. So, have you seen any studies or any papers or whatever it is on the effects of wind turbines that are going to be put out in the sea, in the ocean? I'll worded it better on my paperwork here.
Offshore wind farm.
Yeah, so wind farms and wind turbines are going to put them out in the ocean, like out my way down in the Illawarra. Okay, this was at NREN. There was a group there. Are there any studies to show the effects that it does have on the marine life and the natural habitat of the ocean?
Yeah, I'm honestly not sure. I mean, there's certainly worries about the noise and those sorts of things, and I'm never quite sure whether some of those are overblown. So I've got to say that I don't know enough about it to say a great deal that is sensible. But to me, why would you do it? Why would you put those things out there? It doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense, right? All you need to do is put a nice little nuclear reactor somewhere, maybe next to the Lucas Height ones or somewhere else. And then none of this is necessary. I mean, we've got, proposals up here in North Queensland, all the way down the Great Dividing Range, for just a whole lot of wind farms. And, the amount of damage you're going to do, and all you need to do is build a nice little nuclear reactor that's so clean and so safe. Far more people die erecting wind farms and solar panels than have died from nuclear power. Far more. Why would we build these things out at sea or up on the Great Dividing Range?
I agree. This is the thing, and this is what really, to lack of, pisses me off about all that kind of stuff, is that why we have alternatives that are way better, proven in history, better. Yep. Why not just do that? Because why, I could imagine. Go for it.
It's cheaper, it's cleaner, it's more reliable, it works, right? France has been making 70% of its nuclear power since the 1970s. And, you know, we can make even better nuclear power stations than the French have done. The French have never had a major accident. You know, why can't we just do what they have done, and the British have done, and the Koreans have done? You know, even little countries like, what's it, Qatar or somewhere like that in the Middle East, I think it's Qatar, have got nuclear reactors, and we don't have a nuclear reactor. I don't understand it.
Yeah, it's mental. It is absolutely mental.
Now, Dr. Rid, last time you were on, we didn't have a little final segment that we play every week, but this time that you're on, we're gonna hit you with it. It's called Build Your Own Fantasy Government. Now, you, Dr. Rid, are in control of the next Parliament of Australia, and you can choose 5 or 6 people to head up the next government of Australia. They can be anyone you like, living or dead. Who would you choose?
Jacinta Price, Nampin Jimpa Price, Matt Canavan, Robbie Katter. How many have I got to? I'm not very good at counting.
3.
No, that was 4, isn't it? No, 3.
Yeah, it was 4. No, Jacinta,
Canavan,
Jacinta
and
Canavan, Katter. Yeah. And they have to be politicians, or can I?
No.
Anyone in the world, living or dead.
Amanda Stoker. Yeah, I wish I had a bit more. There's actually too many now to choose from, and I've only got one left, and this is sort of worrying me that I'm going to forget somebody that.
Hey, look, you're in control, so you can choose as many people as you like.
Oh, I thought I'd only had 5
No,
5 or 6, or how many? What? You're the man, so you'll be the head of
I'll
state.
chuck in Pauline Hanson in there. In that case, if I've got Pauline Hanson in there, James Patterson. You know, I'm thinking off the top of my head here. I don't think I can think of a New South Welshman. Are there any good New South Welsh nationals? There must be.
Oh, nationals.
Yes.
Well, Barnaby's down in New South Wales.
Yeah, Barnaby's there. That's right. Yes. So you can see I'm going for people who are outside the city. They've got to be anybody inside the city seem to have lost their brains, seems to be the situation.
It's all the fluoride in the water.
No, it's not. It's because they've become detached from reality. They've been in the city for too long. Yeah, so I think those would be the main ones. I see that there's a lot of good people in the National Party. There are still a few. And look, I've got to say, I'm being pretty impressed by Peter Dutton. I think that the nuclear thing showed a degree of courage that actually I found exhilarating. When I heard that he was going to do that, I got a real feeling of exhilaration, not because I was terribly fussed. You know, the nuclear is not a big deal for me. It was because this was brave. This was something that was really brave, that we finally had a politician on the Conservative side who was going to raise his flag up the flagpole and say, I'm going to fight on this, and they're going to hammer me on this, but I'm going to fight on it. And I thought that was wonderful. In the same way, I thought it was wonderful that he decided to fight on The Voice. So I am impressed by it. I would like him to be more like that and take more risks on things like high immigration rates, and there's various other things that I wish he'd fight more on the net zero thing. But I thought it was exhilarating to see them go for that. So I'd throw Peter Dutton in there as well.
I'm going to be devil's advocate today then, okay? Because so we're happy that Peter Dutton's brought out the nuclear policy and his ideas, okay? But do you not feel that it was more about bending the knee to the net zero and climate catastrophe alarmists? It wasn't because it's like, hey, let's burn coal until we can transfer to nuclear because nuclear is just going to be far superior in the end. It was about, we know that it's basically, we need to get to net zero. The only way we're going to do it is through nuclear.
Yeah, that's a fair criticism of him there, but I think that he's decided that the only way he can keep his hopeless inner city members of parliament in the party is to at least half sign up to net zero. You know, 2050, it's so far in the future that you don't need to worry about it. But here is actually a a way, nuclear is a way where we can actually still have halfway cheap power without killing the country. So, you know, I think you've got to cut him a little bit of slack. His political reality is that those inner city Liberal members of Parliament are, to a large extent, pretty hopeless, right? They may as well be in the Labor Party, right? They're not as bad as, say, the people in the Conservative Party in the UK. But then I think I would prefer Anthony Albanese to Rishi Sunak as a Prime Minister. You know, at least our Labor Party here in Queensland, and even yours in New South Wales, you're digging coal like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow.
If somebody wants to put a new coal mine in, provided they're not called Clive Palmer, they can build a coal mine in Queensland. And yet we're signed at net zero. In the UK, the Conservative Party was the ones who essentially closed down the coal industry, right? So we do reasonably well. But the political reality for the Liberals is that, you know, they've got these problem people in the inner cities because the inner cities have gone crazy. So if you look at the people that I mentioned, they're sort of on the national Liberals, One Nation Katters. I'm very impressed with Robbie Katter as a politician. I mean, Bob's great as well, but Rob is the up and coming one.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought him up because people haven't touched on him before. They haven't spoken so much about Robbie. So you think he's got a big future, do you?
I do, yeah. He's a very sensible politician. He comes from the country, which is always a very good start. And to be fair, most of the National Party, Liberal National Party politicians in the country, in Queensland, are very sensible, right? I was just talking to Tony Perrott, the Agriculture Shadow Minister, the LNP up here. He came up here. Very sensible fellow, but he was explaining to me, we were talking about the Great Barrier Reef, you know, and he was saying, look, I'm with you. I understand there's a problem with the science, but my problem is that those electorates down south, they really believe that the Great Barrier Reef is buggered, right? And what he was essentially sort of half saying is that it's up to the industries to get the news out that the reef is at record high, because then it makes his job much easier to be able to say, well, look, these science institutions seem to have got it wrong. Maybe we should put some of these red team science audits in and sort them out, you know. That would be very easy if people have got the information that they need. So anyway, long story short, I think that most of the politicians in the country areas are pretty sensible. And even some of the Labor ones in, you know, the Hunter Valley, you got people like, what's the guy who's from the guy who lost his son tragically in the army, Joel Fitzgibbon, right? Yeah. Very sensible guy in lots and lots of ways, and yet he's on the Labor side. But you see, he's not in the inner city.
But the problem is that he's in a nonsensible party. You know, you can have sensible people with a nonsensible party.
Well, the Labor Party used to be very sensible. I mean, I voted for Bob Hawke. If Bob Hawke was, you know, suddenly reappeared today, I'd be voting for him because he was pretty sensible, right? So the Labor Party was, you know, a lot of people. There were certainly plenty of crazy ones there, but it's gone way off to the left, and you know, the Liberals have gone off and half followed them. But if you could sign up to a 1980s Labor Party, you'd do it in a flash today, compared with a lot of what we've got from the inner cities.
Well, they do say that politics is downstream from culture. So sometimes it's up to people outside of politics to change the narrative and get the truth out there. And you're doing that in a lot of ways. If anyone wants to follow Dr. Ridd, they can head to YouTube and Reef Rebels. I know you put out a lot of clips on there. I
love Reef Rebels.
Yeah, there's always some really great clip. You know, they're usually within, you know, 10 or 15 minutes. They're right on point and very well produced as well. So look, mate, thank you for everything that you've been doing and that you have done in the past. We need more Peter Ridds out there, I think, just to get the truth out there. I mean, as I brought up some of these articles before, you know, you dig into some of the experts that they talk about and they don't even have degrees in the areas that they're talking about. So you really have to, and look, the general public are not going to look deeply into that stuff. They're just going to read a headline, and I think that's the biggest problem. So the more that people like yourself can do to get information out there, I think the better. So thank you very much for coming on tonight.
My pleasure, and thanks for inviting me.
No, it's our pleasure. But for everyone watching tonight and everyone that's going to watch in the future, thank you very much. We say it every single week. We really rely on our audience to watch our interviews, support us, and also get this information out there. So please share.
Like, subscribe, and share. Like, subscribe, and share.
That's right, because if it's not from the support of our audience, we wouldn't be able to do this as effectively. So thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you all next time.
See you.